The Supreme Court just kicking off arguments on the legality of President Trump's tariffs.
Friend, thank you for joining me today. The wheels of power in Washington move slowly, deliberately, with layers of checks, balances, and procedures designed to prevent rash decisions, only to witness a moment when all of that seems to shift in an instant. That is exactly what happened this week, and the implications could shake the political landscape in ways many Americans aren't fully grasping yet. A federal judge quietly approved a motion that, on its face, may have seemed like a minor procedural step. But beneath that silence lies a move so consequential that it has caused the former president to panic, strategists to scramble, and legal scholars to question just how far authority can be stretched before legitimacy snaps. This isn't about speculation. It's about process. It's about the collision of raw political power with the stubborn architecture of law. And it's happening right before our eyes. Let's unpack what's going on and why this quiet judicial action has the potential to change everything for Donald Trump, and possibly for the entire executive branch. First, let's address what happened. Sources tell us that the judge, presiding over a key financial and administrative case involving the former president, approved a motion that allows investigators to access a series of financial records that Trump and his team had hoped would remain under wraps. On the surface, it's a routine step. A judge granting procedural access is not uncommon. But in this instance, the records in question contain highly sensitive information, including corporate transactions, personal investments, and communications that could have direct implications for multiple ongoing federal and state investigations. This is not just a leak of documents. It's a full-scale opening of doors that Trump had previously believed were locked. Why does this matter? Because it strikes at the core of a strategy the former president has been cultivating for years: the illusion of control. Public appearances, media statements, and even legal maneuvers have all been designed to project strength and inevitability. The former president thrives in the perception of dominance. But the judge's approval subtly undermines that perception. It signals that despite a facade of control, the law can and will move independently, and that even the most meticulously planned strategies can be disrupted by a single, quiet decision. Now, to fully understand why this is shaking the former president, we need to explore the mechanics of the motion itself. The motion wasn't publicized. There were no grand press conferences, no coordinated media blitz. Instead, it was filed and reviewed quietly, almost invisibly, by the court. And therein lies the genius of the judicial system. Sometimes the most powerful moves in politics are those that happen without fanfare. By approving access to these records, the judge effectively bypassed the former president's attempts to control the narrative, to manage the optics, and to project a sense of invulnerability. It's a reminder that in the U.S. legal system, power is never absolute, and the wheels of justice turn even when the spotlight isn't shining. Let's talk about the reactions. Inside the former president's camp, panic is reported to be widespread. Advisors are scrambling to evaluate the scope of what's now accessible. Legal teams are revisiting every document, every line of communication, every transactional record to anticipate what could be leveraged by federal prosecutors or state attorneys. The former president himself, sources say, expressed frustration and incredulity, believing that this was a move that should have been delayed, contested, or prevented entirely. But the judge's decision is final, at least for now, and it creates a scenario where Trump's control over his own narrative is diminished in real time. What makes this situation so significant is not just the immediate access to sensitive documents, but the cascading effects it may trigger. With these records now available, investigators can trace patterns that were previously obscured, connect dots that were previously speculative, and potentially identify legal vulnerabilities that could have long-term consequences. We're not talking about a small procedural hiccup. We're talking about a seismic shift in the strategic landscape. This is a moment that will reverberate through courtrooms, campaign offices, and newsrooms alike. Consider the timing. This judge's approval comes at a critical junction, just months before a new election cycle begins to gather momentum. Political allies of the former president are watching closely, calculating how this development could affect fundraising, endorsements, and public perception. Opponents, on the other hand, are seizing the moment as evidence that accountability is not only possible, but inevitable. The quiet nature of the motion amplifies its impact precisely because it bypasses the predictable theater of politics, hitting where the former president is least able to control the outcome. To understand why this move has caused panic, we need to look deeper at the psychology of authority and perception. Donald Trump has long relied on projecting power, both in public appearances and legal strategies. The idea that a quiet, procedural action could suddenly undermine that projection is deeply unsettling. It highlights a vulnerability that is rarely exposed on camera: the fragility of narrative control. The documents now accessible have the potential to expose contradictions between public statements and private actions, revealing gaps in the carefully curated image of omnipotence. Legal experts point out that this moment is a textbook example of how small procedural steps can have outsized consequences. The judiciary is designed to act independently, and its quiet authority is often more potent than the loudest political declarations. In granting this motion, the judge didn't make a public spectacle, but effectively shifted the balance of power. What's happening here is subtle, but the ramifications are profound. Authority is being tested, and legitimacy is being reaffirmed by the system itself, independent of any individual's influence. Let's also consider the broader implications. This is not just a personal challenge for the former president. It is a precedent-setting moment. The judiciary's ability to act independently, to review motions, and to grant access to critical documents, even when powerful political figures may wish otherwise, is a cornerstone of American democracy. It reminds us that no one, regardless of position, is above scrutiny. And it reinforces the principle that process matters just as much as power. What does this mean for the political strategy of the former president? First, there will likely be attempts to publicly frame the decision as overreach or bias, even though the motion itself is procedural. Expect statements emphasizing fairness, personal attack, or selective targeting, all designed to mobilize the base and reinforce the narrative of persecution. Second, legal teams will need to reassess risk management, potentially preparing additional challenges or seeking to limit the scope of document access. Third, communications advisors will have to pivot, shaping messaging to maintain morale among supporters and allies while mitigating damage in public perception. But beyond politics, there is a cultural and societal dimension to this moment. It is a stark reminder to the American public that democracy functions not just in dramatic televised battles, but in quiet, procedural steps that often go unnoticed. The average citizen may scroll past headlines and see "Judge approves motion," without fully appreciating that this small decision is a key node in the system of checks and balances. In essence, This is democracy quietly asserting itself, proving that the system can operate effectively even when the stakes are high and the actors are influential. It is also worth noting the personal dimension for Trump. Psychological analysts suggest that control and perception are core motivators for the former president. Being blindsided by a quiet judicial move undermines both. It creates a scenario where instinct and reaction must replace the usual narrative control. Advisors, lawyers, and allies become not just support, but shields as the former president navigates an environment where uncertainty has replaced the expected predictability. This shift in dynamics is exactly why the phrase "change is everything" in the title is not hyperbole. It is the real, lived experience of recalibration under pressure. Meanwhile, in the legal sphere, other players are paying close attention. Opposing attorneys, congressional oversight committees, and even state-level investigators are watching closely, understanding that this judicial precedent may influence future cases. If courts demonstrate that procedural motions can bypass political noise effectively, it could reshape how accountability is pursued across multiple levels of governance. The quiet approval, therefore, is not an isolated incident. It is potentially a model for future legal strategy. And yet, this moment is not just about legal mechanics. It is about narrative and legacy. Public perception matters immensely in modern politics. The former president has built a brand, a persona, and a historical image that relies on being perceived as untouchable, decisive, and always in control. The judicial move, though procedural, chips away at that image. It signals that the system can move independently, that authority is conditional, and that even powerful figures can be subjected to processes outside of their control. This also has implications for supporters and detractors alike. For supporters, the move may feel alarming, possibly even unfair. But it is a crucial reminder that institutional stability requires that no one is truly above scrutiny. For detractors, it is confirmation that accountability mechanisms are operational, that oversight functions as intended, and that political influence, while powerful, has limits. Let's step back and reflect on the philosophical implications. The tension here is between authority and legitimacy. Authority is the power to command or control. Legitimacy is the recognition that such authority is rightful, lawful, and accepted. What we are witnessing is a challenge to authority, Trump's projected control, but an affirmation of legitimacy, the judiciary acting in accordance with law. It is a moment where process triumphs over perception, where the quiet enforcement of rules demonstrates that no one's influence is absolute. Now, what happens next? With access to the financial records granted, investigators have a new lens to examine transactions, correspondence, and decision-making processes. Legal teams will undoubtedly push back, but the framework has already shifted. The former president may attempt public messaging to maintain confidence among supporters, but the underlying reality is that a significant gate has been opened. The cascading effects of this single motion could influence multiple investigations, ongoing lawsuits, and political narratives in ways that are difficult to quantify. It is also critical to understand that this is not a moment of spectacle. It is a moment of strategy. Those who recognize the power of procedural moves understand that quiet decisions often produce louder consequences than public statements. By acting within the law, the judge has demonstrated the subtle but immense influence of process. It's a reminder that in democracy, checks and balances are not always loud, flashy, or dramatic. They are deliberate, quiet, and often invisible until their impact is fully realized. Friend, as we watch this unfold, It is vital to appreciate the stakes. The former president's panic is real, not performative. Advisors are recalibrating, investigators are gaining ground, and the public, whether they fully understand it or not, is witnessing the system operate. This is a living lesson in civics. Power has limits, process matters, and the law is not simply a suggestion. It is the framework that holds authority accountable. Finally, let us consider the enduring lesson of this event. Moments like this reveal the difference between temporary authority and lasting legitimacy. Quick headlines, dramatic statements, and public appearances may project strength, but it is the slow, careful operation of law and procedure that ensures institutions endure beyond any individual. The judge's quiet approval may seem small today, but its ripple effects will shape strategy, perception, and accountability in the weeks and months ahead. If you found value in unpacking this story, if you want to understand how quiet legal maneuvers can shape the course of history, I encourage you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. By doing so, you are participating in the act of civic awareness, staying informed, and recognizing the subtle but powerful ways in which democracy functions. Until next time, keep watching closely, think critically, and never underestimate the quiet power of process.